Hey all, it's Friday. It's Ben and I. It was going to be originally TNT and we had a last minute change, so it's TNB. We need a D, TBD.
Okay.
I'm just throwing too many things at you.
There's too many.
This is what happens
things
when I
today.
get on a stage. Okay, I was saying in our little test stream earlier that Max and I were running. Every one of these streams started out the same for us. It's been busy and I'm tired, but we should also ask if the sound's okay, if the video's okay. And the main thing we just need you guys to do is if like the buffering issue we've seen the last couple of weeks, you know, we don't know entirely if it's always on Twitch's end or our end, just let us know if it starts going wonky. And keep it civil, meaning rapid fire questions so I can see Max scrolling up and down as fast as he can. Wait a minute, slow down. We good?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So it is Friday.
Yeah, I think we only do this on Friday.
I don't think I've actually been on a stream in a few weeks, so sometimes I like to throw in a, hey, if you're new to this, we basically go over the highlights of progress through the week. This, of course, isn't all the progress. This is just kind of the more interesting things. Try to be very open and honest with you guys with some of the stuff we're working on, and right now we're very focused on support classes.
I guess so.
Ben's going to start us... and prefacing that, we read the top 10, which has kind of become the top 10-ish, depending on... Once we started always doing more than 10 items, it became the top 10-ish. And then we'll do a shortish Q&A afterwards. Those will be questions that are more geared towards design. And kind of, for me, I guess, right now, art production? Art things? How it all glues together? I'm not making trees right now.
I do need some trees, though.
You need more trees. Of course you need more trees. Okay. Go ahead. Number 1.
Oh, yeah. So, number 1, work in progress gameplay, Dark Fool. So we added the Dark Fool class to the patcher, which, are we doing a test this weekend?
No, okay. Since Ben's bringing it up, there is not a planned test for this weekend. The focus of next week, probably midweek, is to get the Dark Fool in for testing, and with the goal of a planned test at the end of next week.
Okay, so all of his abilities and songs and all that should all be done. So he's ready for testing.
Don't listen to Ben. Not done. You know, like placeholder, VFX, SFX, the same thing we do every single time we add a class in.
I see.
Initial animations, bug testing, placeholder stuff.
So does he have his animations for his new instrument?
The Dark Fool?
Yeah.
He should next week.
He should.
That's
he
what
should
Scott... one of the items on here is Scott setting up the base anim set.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll get to that in a later item.
This is him playing his bone reed pipe. Boop,
yeah.
boop, boop.
So number 2 is the Scald. Anthony completed work on the ability components and the starter abilities traits for the Scald. We are currently in process of attaching placeholder VFX and SFX. Okay, so the Dark Fool has placeholder VFX and SFX, and the Scald needs placeholder VFX and SFX. Okay.
Yeah, basically we put the Minstrel in with some placeholder stuff, but he didn't have animations last week. And so this next week, the Minstrel will have some animations, the Dark Fool will have some animations, and Scott will work on the Scald animations.
All right.
And then I think, what was it, last night and this morning, you were part of this. I was putting in instrument items for testing.
Yeah, we put the item diffs in, so those should be all hooked up.
So you guys let us know when the guy's playing the harp-a-lyre if it's like upside down.
All right. Number 3 then is tech for the support classes. Anthony spent some time working on the major support classes, archetype bugs. Songs persisting after death was probably the most popular one. If you were in this weekend's playtest, that was kind of problematic. But that should be fixed. He also added the item defs for the support class instruments. Yeah, so that was what we were just talking about. There's actual models for their instruments now, so those should start showing up the next time we run a test.
Yeah, making games is hard and convoluted. There's a lot of little steps to get everything plugged in. That, I think, is my focus in general. Okay, why isn't this working? It was working yesterday.
Well, that's not as much the implementation progress as there's
Sure.
a lot of points of failure where things can go wrong, and knowing which one failed is often a hard
Okay, tools. Rob worked on the terrain editor performance this week. He improved the threading of the terrain editor so that dragging points around is more responsive. This should make it quicker to build terrain for the game. The longer version of that is that, as I understand it from Rob, he fixed a bunch of things that exposed the fact that none of the threading was actually working. So it runs really fast, it just doesn't update fast. Tech logging. Mark C started work on rollover for our logging server and cold storage, specifically for our chat logs. Rollover is the automated creation of new data indices. Oh, you gotta change that. That didn't look right. Indices. Once our current indices hit a certain parameter, such as lifetime, size, or document volume. Cold storage is a state that's optimized for high density and storage capacity, but slow access times for documents we need forever, but don't need to access frequently. Number 6, tech tools servers. Mark C also landed the previously spoken of tool for automated shard configuration, startup, and teardown. Additionally, it can detect the existence of new servers and will update itself. This work is a stepping stone to a fully automated cloud layer to support a live game. Number 7, tech Linux work in progress, tech Linuxification. This week, Colin started getting our servers running on Docker containers on Linux. This is all I know. This is a pair of pants. The Docker containers should make it easier for us to manage our servers. I don't know what that is. I gotta ask.
Server pants.
Server pants. Work in progress. Number 8, tech nav mesh. So Lee had a major breakthrough with the nav mesh creation this week and was able to finally get all the problems fixed. I love the way that's phrased. All the problems. I'm not sure we should.
All of the problems are now fixed.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So, to preface this, there were a lot of issues generating the nav mesh with holes and stuff that were happening. So I believe that's what we're referring to, and I should add a clarification there. Collinear points on the borders of polygons are annoying. Enough said. Now that the 3D mesh is being created properly, he needs to get the actual pathfinding working with the new nav mesh structure. He has already made good inroads to this, and things are looking good so far. And to further characterize this, if you missed a last stream, basically it was a 2D nav mesh. So if you had an archway hanging over, the NPCs wouldn't know if your character was standing in there. They would try and go around the whole thing. Number 9, work in progress CU chat server. JB and Tim are currently working to land the overhaul of the chat server. This new version will be able to handle permissions for rooms and all the stuff we need for a live game chat, like local chat, warband, orders, campaigns, custom rooms, all with secure permissions, ownership, and moderation. Number 10, Google, work in progress. Mark met with Google this week in a continued effort to find the best home for CU. I personally love the phrasing on that one. Lots of chit-chatting, lots of impressed people. This was another item we needed checked off for a release. 11, medium armor concepts. After creating the first support archetype instrument models, we moved on to new medium armor, some of which fits perfectly on these new classes. We'll pick a few assets next week to begin modeling those. Work in progress art VFX. Mike worked on fixing a few of the mismatched placeholder VFX on the Minstrel. He's also investigating large-scale lightning strikes, which is helping us vet the particle editor's tech, as well as exposing any rendering issues. And I can see them over there. And Mike, don't get a headache. His screen is just... Art animation. Scott worked on finishing up the basic needs of the Minstrel and Dark Fool animations, including retargeting the Dark Fool's animations over to the Lucrepan skeleton. He's finished setting these up for testing and will work on the Scald next week, like we said. Work in progress number 14, art concept NPCs. We've continued working on new concepts for various NPCs one might encounter in CU, including lowercase dragons, but not uppercase dragons.
What does that even mean?
Remember how we have like the big giant old god type of dragon? Mm-hmm. Not that type of dragon. Okay, that's it.
Only 14 things on our top 10 list?
Only 14 things. Well, earlier I was like, I was missing a few people, and I was like, why is it shorter? And I was like pinging people like, we're missing things. I know the other stuff was going on. Mm. Usually I end up standing there. People always look up at me, and I'm standing in the office looking at each person to jog my memory, like, what am I missing here? Someone didn't tell me what they were working on, or I'm missing something. Okay, that's it. Now we roll into Q&A.
Give us your questions. We have got an art guy and a design guy here. So
programming questions.
Programming questions, really specific.
Motorcycle maintenance.
Servers and No, don't ask those questions. Ask about art and design. Salty Chew asks, will each support have multiple instrument options? And how will their itemization slash stat choices work?
So right now, all of the
I'm gonna just check in on this little meeting that's making a lot of noise in the background.
fine, just leave then.
Well, I think you can still answer this question.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Okay.
So right now, all of the classes, not just the support classes, but all of the classes sort of have a thematic weapon that they use. There will be choices as far as the specific item for each class. Once we have time to do more concepting and modeling, you'll be able to see the different items of that type that you'll be able to equip, and they'll have different stats, and that will be derivative from crafting and in the same way that all of the items are. But they won't be like drastically different as far as like different classifications where each class will have like choices that aren't in any way similar and fulfill the same purpose. We're kind of keeping everyone thematically along a specific path so that they have a...
What was the question?
Like, do classes have... Well, specifically, do the support classes have like a range of instruments? And so they have like a type of instrument that they use, but each instrument that they have will be of that type.
Thematically of the type.
Yeah.
And
because we don't want to have like 12 different animation sets. For
Yeah,
them to
yeah. I
play
mean,
all kinds of different instruments.
having a different instrument also means new music, new animations. You know, every one of those instruments adds another week or two to do just on that one simple side of things. Well, that probably a week and a half, more than that, making the models, everything like that. Plus, with the way, you know, I probably what we'll do is sorry, I'm tired. Long week. We usually, you know, put in different weapons, but right now it'll be just like one model, get the class in, figure out that the abilities work, debug all of that stuff. Really get the class to be fun before you worry about things that are, I don't know, less important, I would say.
Well, they'll need to have some variety in their stats and models and things so that you can differentiate between the different types of...
And we even talked about, like, we were looking at Scott's Harpalier animation, like, you know, doing a different animation or something like that for different abilities. That's kind of the first wave of bonus.
Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Makes sense to me. Bobo Dayak asks, will you also invent some new music sounds to go with the original musical instruments in CU? Or will you go for some more down-to-earth sounds?
Well, the things that are in there aren't... Well, technically the Scalds thing is going to be a unique... You know, we'll have to make that up. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to have a sound guy.
So the Harpalier, I mean, if you look at the concept, looks like a three-necked guitar. It's going to be a string instrument. Kind of a DB question whether he goes kind of classic, real world or odd. The other one's basically like a pan flute, but I could see kind of doing some fun stuff with that. But the Scald's harmonic frost axe, Scott, we're gonna have to have a conversation about what we want to do for animation for
He's
that.
kind of a shouty Viking guy. So
yeah, I don't know what we want to do. Scott was asking me about that. I was like, this is a Ben question. Basically, the weapon looks like an axe, kind of like a horn, like a resonating chamber in the center of it. And Scott was asking me about it. I was like, dude, I don't know at this point. You bang it on something, he's got to run over to a rock and boom. I'm sure you've got a plan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Inflicting Megahertz asks, when might we expect more documentation on the design choices you've made so far? Lately it's been a bit of a black box. Design is happening.
I think Mark got asked a similar question.
I don't know what he said, but that is more of a question for Mark. If you ever
He
ask...
said he wants to get around to it.
Yeah, if you ever have a question of like when something is going to happen, that's generally a question for Mark on the schedule of like, well, what things are happening next? What things are happening now? When is the next? What's the next thing that's going to be coming up? Like, that's really things that he's on here often enough that you should probably direct to him.
Mumblefish asks, does the current iteration of the ability builder represent an unlocked ability builder that may never be fully achievable in-game, or does it represent more than what we will all roughly work with in the release game?
So right now you have access to a whole bunch of things that probably are more than what you'll have like the first day when you first start a new character. But we also want to add to that list too, so that there will be sort of a pass. Well, what we did for the beginning, for when we first get these classes implemented, was we tried to fill out enough things to where we would be able to adequately test all the major features and important characteristics of the classes. And there's no sort of unlocking or selecting progressive crazy things are going on. There's no way to unlock new things right now in the game. So right now you just have access to everything right from the start, and that's easier for us for testing as well, because we don't want you to have to come into like a weekend test and then spend 10 hours or something to get your next component or whatever.
You
so
should
it's
be
just
able
all
to
unlocked
play
from
with
the
all
full-
of it.
Yeah, because we need to get it all tested. But hopefully as we get into finishing more and more of like our first pass of each of these archetypes for all the different classes that we need, we'll go back into some of the ones we had previously implemented and then add more things to them based on what they seem to need as the playtesting continues and we get more of an idea of how balance is working out.
Don't Look _ asks, how much of the skill building system was influenced by Path of Exile's gem system?
It wasn't really. I do like that system. Path of Exile has some really good systems in terms of their progression and itemization and things, but the skill building system was something Mark actually brought up based on a game called Magica, which you may be familiar with, which was more of a like live custom ability building based on just like rapidly tapping a few buttons that would combine into something specific. So we sort of took that into like a pre-build sort of concept where instead of doing that live, at execution time, you did it in a pre-configured sort of a way where you were actually building your abilities into buttons that you would only have to push one button to execute a skill as opposed to pushing 4 or 5 each time you were trying to execute an ability. So that's sort of the background behind that. Mark would probably have more of a story of where all that exactly came from and why we went the way we did with that system.
Inflicting Megahertz has an art question.
I love this name.
Do you consider rigging to be a part of an artist's job, or do you have a specific person to make the rigs?
This is one of those things that if you're going to do like character, which would include even down to a dog or a cat, creature stuff, if you're going to do the modeling, to do a good job, you technically need to know how to work with the rigging and the skeleton, just kind of what is required on the low poly model. And it also, who does that also depends on the studio. Larger studios, like when I worked at EA, we had like a specific technical artist who was primarily about rigging and weighting characters. On a smaller team, you generally need someone who can do a little bit of both, work with the characters or do animation and rigging and weighting. So it kind of just depends on the studio. I mean, it really depends on what they need. I certainly think it's an artist thing, definitely. You can get very technical with rigs, and when they get really technical, when you've got a lot of bones and you're supporting a team of artists and you need a lot of handles and it needs to be easy to use, then you start getting into more of a specialized role.
But I think that specialized role is still artistic in nature because it's not purely technical in its implementation unless you're trying to like procedurally do it.
Yeah, I mean,
something.
there's
it's
a bit
still
of
a
it.
manual process to finesse it and get it to look good when everything moves.
Yeah,
right?
there's a bit of an overlap where it's just kind of like if you can spot like that doesn't look right, and in a 3-dimensional sense come up with how the topology of the character should change to facilitate that. That's kind of that gray area where I mean, I watch like John works back and forth with Joe all the time, and if we add an extra edge loop here, then we get X, and then then I go, okay, great, get it off to Scott and let him try it out real quick, and he goes, oh, this is so much better.
Brand02 asks, as possibly the first class being added post Character 2.0, is the support class more or less challenging than Mage Design, and why?
That mixed two disciplines. One was Character 2.0 was mainly focused on the art, and the other one was focused on the design. The latter half of that question.
Yeah, do you mean by that question, was it more difficult to design that class, or was it more difficult to play that class? So in terms of design, the designs for these classes have been sort of waiting on implementation for quite a while. And we're just now getting around to having the basis in our system and the time free for the right engineers and the artists and everybody to get all these things actually put into the game. And so there are classes, like the Devouts and stuff that are designed. They're just not in the game yet just because we haven't had time to actually get them implemented. As far as actually playing them and their difficulty challenge-wise as far as players, I don't know. It's hard to say if they're actually more challenging than mages to play. I think mages are more difficult to play well just because they have such a difficult time not being interrupted, and they're sort of such a glass cannon sort of a class, right? So they have to stay at it a distance, and they have close range area of effect things that they can use very carefully if they can position themselves and time themselves very, very closely. Support classes have a lot more mobility and don't have a lot of things that can stop them from doing what they're doing, and they have a lot of counters to things because of their nature of like buffs and debuffs and cleanses and purges and all kinds of things. So I think they're easier to play like at a basic level. Like if you're just gonna put together some abilities and run around and push some buttons, like you can be more effective on a support class than you can be on a mage probably. But if you're gonna play them at a very high level, it might be more challenging than that because they have the combinations of like melodies and harmonies and things where you really have to master your overlaps for your different songs and keeping things balanced where you're running all the right things at all the right times for all the people around you, not just paying attention to yourself and your own DPS. So that's sort of where that falls. It's a very different play style and very different classes.
Did he add anything about why the 2.0 got brought up in that question?
Yes. Brand clarifies art design would be the focus.
Oh, the art design. Did we do anything artistically different?
No, I mean once we got the character, we haven't built. I literally just said, "Hey, new armor and stuff that could possibly go on these guys." So we haven't built anything that's new. We did improvements that will just be continual. We rebuilt the characters in a better way. The tech that supports them is a higher res textures, but the art is basically going to be the same. There's really, now that we're in that phase, it was just a list of things that we wanted to do to improve the characters, and we hit them all and then had to rebuild the pre-existing stuff.
Yeah, well, we introduced a new class to the game. We're not introducing a new race, right?
Yeah.
And the race is what defines the actual look of the character,
So,
and then they get armor, and armor isn't really class-specific either,
No.
so we're not really building new class-specific armor most
Right.
of the time. They are getting new weapons, and then they're getting new effects, right?
Oh, move over. I'm just going to say hi.
Mark says he wasn't feeling too good. I
Yeah.
don't need to get sick again.
Yeah, not feeling well, going home, getting into bed. Hi, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.
I've gotten sick twice in the past 3 weeks. I don't need to get it again. That's why I was going. Ugh.
Hey, I can't blame it.
Yeah.
Get well soon, MJ. Bye, Mark. Feel better.
It's that time of year. That's what the two doctors' offices that were totally booked said to me.
Yeah, I know. Goodbye.
Okay.
But we do have to do new effects.
So yes, there's so many moving pieces. To talk more about the art, basically the stuff we create is relatively consistent. We have new rules, we have new proportions, we have new texture sizes. All of that stays pretty much the same. The only real difference that adds any additional scope is, like you said, if it's the lucre pan, we have to kind of shape it in. Women, we have to shape the hips, the chest, and everything. And I think something about the upper body, just lots of little things, but it's all consistently the same. There isn't really kind of a new thing every time we add a new class. What we want to be doing is making some new art that is meant to be shared amongst everybody. So if you want to be whatever class you're playing, you can put on this helmet. That's the end goal. So we're not making necessarily class-specific gear that would be related to adding a new class. That said, however, we are still making gear that kind of looks like it fits a certain class because people like to have a little bit of a theme going on.
And then we got to add some hamadryads and cats and burgers.
Yes. So all of that stuff, those will be kind of where the new thing will be. So when it comes to like a new body type, while they'll share a lot of the same rules that we've developed that have improved things, those new body types will have their own new challenges.
Yeah. But that's why the Characters 2.0 was so important. so that we can
Yeah,
support
yeah,
stuff
we
like
needed
that.
we needed to nail down a better improvement, and like every game or every art, you could keep going, and I'm sure we could come up with a characters 3.0 if we wanted to. But right now, we've gotten to a good place where everything works. We know what we're doing. The only thing we need to do, which I'd like to get to eventually, is just the crafting for tinting and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea for sure.
But I will, if you look in today's update, there'll be images of the medium gear. Some of them are just, I think they're awesome.
Yeah, I
like
haven't seen them
they
yet.
look
I'll have to
really
look.
cool. I was like, ooh, these are sweet. And I don't think I'm giving them all to you this week. I think it'll be this week and next week, some different images.
Yomi asks, for the features you have confirmed are planned, but haven't begun work on, how well defined conceptually are they internally, or are they still pretty malleable from a design perspective?
It varies from
Very
one to
easy
another.
question for Ben.
So some of the things, I don't want to say that it depends on when they're going to be implemented, but the things that are on the to-do list more immediately tend to be more well-defined than the things that we're going to be doing like far later down the line. But that's not always true. There are certain systems where Marcus put a lot of detail into them that are still not even on our near-term schedule.
Yeah, I mean, if you read any of Ben's design write-ups that he's done in the newsletter, I mean, a lot of those account for sometimes things don't work. Sometimes you have to readjust. Sometimes players don't like what you think they were going to like. I mean, there is a certain malleability that is inherent in developing a game.
Well, yeah, and we don't try to really make everything set in stone, even when we're doing any kind of pre-implementation design. There are a lot of things that we write up, and then we get around to implementing them, and programmers are like, oh, well, the way that you wrote this would be really hard, but if we just changed it a little bit, it would be really easy. And we're like, well, go with the really easy way because it accomplishes basically the same goal. Or,
And we do that with
needs
art,
some,
too.
Yeah, that needs some kind of adjustments, and we'll have to rethink the way that we're considering some of the other interrelated pieces in order to facilitate going with a slightly different solution. And so there are changes in terms of the implementation, and then even more once we get into the testing and we decide, hey, this isn't actually very fun, and we need to, make some
or the
changes
opposite.
based
Hey,
on-
this was really fun, or this was a bug. Could we do something with this?
Yeah, the one of the crazy things about game design that you'll definitely hear stories about if you follow a lot of developers is when
When there's a
bug
bug.
happened and
And it's
everybody was
fun.
like, that is amazing. We need to turn this into something
Yeah.
real and actually make it a feature.
Oh, I mean, even when we've gotten the numbers wrong with what was it? I think it was when we were pushing and we were doing impulses on characters and they were flying and stuff. Everybody was having fun with that, and it was like, oh, well, maybe there's room for things like
Physics
this.
is one of those
Yeah.
things. Physics animation bugs are some of the best bugs.
Lodoween has a somewhat complicated question. Has any thought been given to not having group affecting abilities and only AoE for healing and buffs to more closely match damage and debuff abilities, or do you not consider that hand-holding?
I'm not sure that I even understand.
I
the
think he
question.
means like you said debuffs and buffs, but I'm assuming everything that's not that would be offensive.
Only AoE for healing and buffs
like only AoE and like no directed single target healing.
to more closely match damage.
Like there's AoE damage and
I
there's
think that's
AoE
what he
healing.
means direct.
Um,
There's both in the game.
Lodoween, give us a clarification if you're still in chat. Zumos MMORPG
He drops that
asks,
complex one and leaves.
No, Lodoween clarifies no group all caps spells.
Oh, okay. So the reason that a lot of these things are capped to groups as opposed to allowing them to apply to everyone is that supportive and beneficial things having unlimited scaling has a lot more negative consequences than uncapped damage.
Yeah, a whole pile of people all buffing everybody that can get close enough to them.
Yeah, so if you have like 5 healers standing around all healing each other, then they're all going to affect each other, and they're going to
Then
have
the groups can be whatever they want, and
really,
you don't.
yeah, like it tends to get into problems, especially when you get into really large numbers, which again, Camelot Unchained is focused around having larger scale battles than you've seen in pretty much any other game. When we have a battle with 1,000 players, if everybody's able to cross heal everybody else around them with no caps,
There's one guy right in the center of a big mass of melee.
You basically have to one-shot people because they're getting so much healing every second that they would never die otherwise. And so we have to limit beneficial things a lot more than we have to limit damage. Whereas all those people taking damage means that they'll die and someone will win. And we don't end up with like a sort of stalemate situation. We also want to facilitate group play in such a way that for specifically support classes, which was kind of what we're talking about, where you have a support class in your group, not just a support class who happens to be nearby in a clump of 100 people giving you benefits from their songs. So you really do still have to care about group composition and group structure in the same way that you've had to in older games for things like support classes.
We're humans. We'll game anything. Figure out the way to use it.
Zumos MMORPG asks, how is the air system going?
Well, right now it isn't going. We've previously had a version of it into testing that just had like literally hard-coded values for when certain abilities would impact each other. And that wasn't something that we ported over into the
new
previous. Well, I don't want to say new anymore because this was a long time ago.
Yeah,
it's been it was in alpha when that was working, right? So it's been a long time since that's been in the game, even since before we had mages implemented back in. And so right now that's not something that's actually testable in the game right now. You won't see a lot of interactions when you're playing mages or doing any other kind of magical effects from other classes.
Yeah, there was a lot of work on the ability system that had to also come in kind of before that, which was like getting these support classes working, panic, all these other things that needed to be added.
Not necessarily. Like, so we prioritized those things higher because getting mages into the game was really important, and then getting support classes into the game also was really important to kind of fulfill that group composition and getting a good feel for the way that RVR will kind of work out, because without having support classes, that's kind of one of the major missing archetypes, and not having magic and having mages was also really important. But having those interactions and having the capability to say, well, when spell A hits spell B, result C happens, like that's another important part of getting, especially in large scale battles when there's going to be a lot of these things happening, getting the flow of the game working. But
kind of
prioritize having it's just a matter of time of like how long is it going to be before we get more classes into the game, how long is it going to be before we get more systems into the game. And so the air system is something that we really want to get back to, but did have to have some fundamental restructuring of the ability system that was quite a ways behind now, but we haven't gotten back into the actual air interactions and having the ability for those things to happen. But it's structured now in a way that it can.
That was fun
it just
stuff.
Hasn't been
even the hard coded stuff was a lot.
It's something that we're all looking forward to getting back into testing. It's just a matter of when that's going to be a priority to get back in versus implementing more classes, which is what we're doing now.
Bobo Deok asks, I think we were told that multiple support classes from the same realm can combine their musical / shouts abilities. Will the music sounds reflect that? I.e., can the same song be played by multiple instruments with multiple people?
Was that a thing?
Yeah, so the minstrel has something that's like that. I'm trying to think if that's tied up in the same system, actually, where we have to have a cognizance of what is getting.
Yeah, combination.
It's sort of
result.
It's sort of a thing combining with itself as opposed to a thing combining with something else. But it's the same nature of an effect, where it's like when a character has an effect and then receives another effect, if that effect is the same, do something else. I'm not sure where that specifically is, but that is something that we would like to be able to do on our timeline for having specifically minstrels. I'm not sure if everybody gets that, where you get special benefits for having multiple group members who are a support class playing the same song, providing the same effects. But it's definitely something that is we've talked about before, and something we want to be able to facilitate. I think it might be tied up into that same interaction system, though.
Drooged asks, you mentioned unlocking things in the ability builder. Can you describe how the skill tree will be presented to the player? For example, will players collect components until they have a bunch, or will they make choices that gray out things that they didn't choose, possibly forever?
So the way that we've talked about our progression is that we're trying to keep it very horizontal rather than vertical. So we're not trying to make it to where, you go and you get Fireball 1, and then you get Fireball 2, and then you get Fireball 3, and you're just getting
And you
more
avoid
and more,
Scorch over here.
Yeah, and you're just getting more and more power. And so you will start out with a bunch of things that are grayed out, basically, that you don't have access to. And then as you achieve proficiency and mastery in a specific component of a type, so like a rune for magic or whatever it is, you'll be able to select the next one that you want to unlock from that category without a lot of depth of prerequisites and necessity of going up a tree sort of structure. There's just a list of them, and you can pick in pretty much any order which other one you want to select next. And then as you achieve mastery of that one, you can pick another one, and so on. And this will allow your character to gain breadth over time of like the number of abilities that you can have on your bar, the number of abilities that you can use in different situations for different benefits, and will allow your character to be more effective in more situations as opposed to just straight up more powerful all the time. And so that's sort of the progression model that we're trying to go through. Is just something that will give you more diversity in your effects and more combination possibilities in your ability builder, rather than something that will just have a vertical tree that you unlock more and more things that make you straight up more powerful.
Yeah, if you go in and play with any of them, and you start figuring out kind of what situational things help, and then if you were to take all that away, you go, oh, I don't have as many situations I can cover.
Yomi asks, how high of a priority to you is the Scout class in terms of overall game impact and early/late implementation?
I'll just leave you here. I'm gonna go make a tree or something. I knew this was gonna be all support class questions.
You should ask about trees.
No, don't ask about trees.
So
maybe the next one's
no tree question.
So support classes are one of the classes that are going to be really core to groups like healers, right? Where you kind of need that to really have a group that functions running around in the open world. Scouts are kind of an aside. They're not one of the, I would say, like core. They're certainly not a direct combat class, so they're not one of like the core necessary classes that you're going to see running around in like every single group. But because they are so integral to the like cartography, the way that the mapping system and knowledge of objectives and things on the map works, for me personally, I would like to see them coming in sooner than some of the other combat related classes that are going to be more optional, where you're not necessarily always going to need to have a healer. You're going to need to have a healer. You're not necessarily always going to need to have a shapeshifter or something in all of your groups in the same way, because they have sort of more of a niche role that's not 100% necessary. But we'll see how that pans out, because they're tied into like a whole system, like the whole map system. Having them implemented just in terms of their abilities without that system doesn't really make any sense. And so we have to build this whole system of knowing where things are in the world and navigating and updating knowledge of, the status of objectives and keeps and things. Once we have that system implemented, we can sort of implement it in a way that's kind of like what we're doing with crafting, right? We don't have our crafter class implemented right now, but we do have a crafting system implemented. So we could implement the mapping system and the cartography system and just be like, okay, everybody can do this for right now, but eventually it'll be limited to just scouts. And so for that reason, I think maybe scouts might fall a little bit later in the timeline, but we certainly can't do them really in any kind of useful way until that system is present. Of course, I can think of reasons why I would like every class to be the next class that we make. Scouts are especially fun because they're one of the super unique classes to the game that's not something that you see really anywhere else, and super necessary to the way that we want our overall like RVR game to play out. But it is hard to say because of that systemic requirement where they will fall in the timeline. But of course, I would love to be working on them right now, but that's something that we need more things in place before we can really do that.
Mumblefish has a question that might be art related. It's 3 words. Why no bagpipes?
Honestly, that's a design question.
It's because we can't have animating models for weapons.
Is that why? Yeah. There you go.
Like
I didn't know if you had decided.
I
if
want
that-
to have chain whips and all kinds of cool
Yeah,
weapons,
okay.
but we can't
So,
animate
so
them.
right now we'd have to, there's a lot of tech to build. There's still a lot to do. We're trying to get through it all, and so adding in things that we don't necessarily have to have, like what Ben just said, is like co-parented animated objects on the character, meaning like 2 animation systems running in tandem, so that the bagpipe is doing one thing and the character's doing another. Now, granted, we could make a bagpipe and not animate it.
It's true.
I mean, the strings on the harpalier don't move.
Bows don't bend.
Yeah, my assumption was that was more of a design question, but if that was your prerequisite that you wanted an animated bagpipe, we could also just throw that out the door and just say it's a bagpipe, and you just sit there and do this, and you could actually compress your arm a little bit inside of it. And
Grimslag asks, twisting one's tunes together to generate different realm-friendly area effects, how many songs can one speed class realistically intertwine at once?
Oh, jeez. I'm not really sure. Because you can set up your... Let's see. There's Banes and Boons that interact with this, and there are optional components that interact with this. You can do at least 2. I think you can do 3. I'm not sure if you can do 4. but that's something we'll have to get into balance things with too, because if you can reliably do a lot of these things all at the same time with one class, there's a lot less incentive to have more than one of them in your group. But they do also come with a lot of cost too, because the longer your overlap duration is, the more your maintenance cost is, I think. And so the more of those that you have running, the more expensive they are. And they also have a startup cost. So you're going to run out of resources if you're trying to run a lot of things all at the same time. So you're not going to be able to do it for very long. But that's, again, something that we have to get into balance over as well, so that we make sure that even if you can do this for like brief periods of time when it's like, oh no, I need all of these things right now, that you can't just keep that going perpetually forever.
Calm Tempest asks, will there be RP or fun spells, like transforming yourself into a bear, or making yourself glow, or leaving flower footsteps?
Well, so some of those things are not necessarily just for fun, but actually have gameplay ramifications.
all of those could.
Yeah, but
Maybe the flowers.
so we do have emotes, right? That are like just mostly silly things that don't have any kind of actual gameplay to them. So maybe we can do some more advanced things with those as we get more systemic functionality.
So we've kind of shied away from shape shifting for everybody, partly because it's just more, artwork that needs to be done.
But we just haven't gotten to it yet, because there's a whole
because there's shape
class
shifters,
archetype
sure.
that
But
we'll need.
I'm saying like that's time for those guys, not to give it to other people. Yeah, I mean, technically, we could just, like you said, we could do more emotes, and, we can support putting VFX and sounds at different points in the animations. The flower thing, we could probably do, but I'd like a little bit more tech help to make that work better. But yeah, I think that would all just come down to doing emotes. Like, we just need to, get through all the core stuff and then go, what other fun things do we want to add?
Yeah, there's a lot of that is just in terms of prioritization, because we need animations for our classes in order to do combat. We don't necessarily need the just for fun animations in order to do combat. So since we need to test combat, we're focused on the combat.
Yeah, I would rather people...
And then once we get into closer to launching
I'd rather
the game,
people
we'll
were
have
playing
more
the game
time.
for hours on end because they were playing the game and not standing around emoting. As fun as it is, I understand that it's fun, and we like doing those things.
Having those kind of social features and stuff is important.
Right.
It just doesn't need as much testing.
Right.
So we don't need it now because right now we're mostly focused on like, does this even work? Is it even fun?
Yeah, you know what'd be fun is if we did like later at that point like a contest for just fun stuff like that and had people come up
Emote
with
ideas?
Yeah. I mean, because we'll come up with ideas here, and I mean, God, we come up with some really good dirty ones we haven't made yet.
Yomi asks, are devouts also very important for the RVR aspect? I guess if only to serve the purpose of melee class that isn't a heavy fighter.
I was actually going to ask that question later after the stream.
Oh, okay.
Because we were talking about the importance of different archetypes.
So having healing is important to your group. You can have a group without a healer, but you'd have to be very specialized in order to just do all your damage immediately and not get drawn into a protracted battle where lack of healing is going to kill you off.
I think you've built a class like that, because I've been wiped out by you a few times in playtests where you'll just come charging through and I'm like, Jesus, I'm dead.
Depends on what class you play. A lot of times archers and mages will have some problems with those sorts of things.
That's specifically what I'm complaining about.
Yeah. But in terms of the devout classes, like, if you have devout, more than one devout character in your group, that might be enough healing to where you don't necessarily need to take a healer. So it gives you some more flexibility to say, okay, in my group composition, I know that I probably want to have some amount of healing. And especially if you're in a smaller group where you're not running 8, but you're running like 2 or 3 people. You're not necessarily going to need one of those people to be a healer, but having one of them that's a devout, you have some damage and some healing there. So that might be a good option for you. And in terms of having like a full group, if you have a healer, do you take 2 healers? Do you take a healer and a devout so that they can cross heal each other a bit? And one that has a bit more, as you said, like staying power in melee range as opposed to a healer that might have less self-defense sort of things. I think it does give a lot of flexibility, but they're not necessarily a like must-have sort of a class in the same sort of a way as I would say that like for just a roaming group, having a support class that you have speed is important. But if you're doing a castle siege or something, you might not necessarily need to have a support class because you're not going anywhere. You don't need that as a necessary benefit, but you still might like to have them because they have a lot of buff and debuff sort of effects and ways to get rid of negative effects on your group that you might also find important even if you're not trying to do any kind of distance sort of gameplay. So
I was just going to add something.
Oh,
I thought
okay.
you were, I can't tell when you were done.
No, that's fine.
I just wanted to try and wrap up. I've got someone I got to
are
talk
we at
to,
the end
and
of our time? Yeah.
Well, we're getting there, and I got to put the update together.
Yeah, so I think that the devout class will be important, but not necessarily a must-have character. But you do need to account for healing as something that's important, and devout class does provide that.
Yeah, I like those guys.
Protest the Bread asks, if a tree falls in the woods and a player's camera isn't viewing it, does it make a sound?
If you're close enough, I would presume yes.
Yeah, I don't think that sounds are limited to your
Yeah, it has
view
nothing to do
angle.
with the
It's
view
just based
angle.
on proximity.
That's part of what DB's been really working on is kind of a prioritizing system of what's going to be loud, what do you need to be hearing, things like that. So certainly if you're in the middle of a battle and some kind of ambient thing that has been classified as not important to your character falls behind you, you might not hear it. You're going to be hearing the arrow coming at you or the fireball or the guy in front of you.
Yeah, the sound engine can only handle so many things
That
happening
too.
at once. And so we do need to prioritize that to some extent to where we're going to have to call out if there are too many sound events. And when we're having battles of 1,000
you're not going
players,
to want to
there
hear
are too many
everything.
sound
You're not going to
events.
want it. Yeah, there's even the idea of like just a cacophony of sounds that play to make up battle versus everybody's hits.
Yeah, there's some trickery going on there where you're not necessarily hearing exact sounds. You're hearing a sound that aggregates a bunch of sounds together.
Did you want to call the 5-minute warning now? Okay. 5-minute warning, folks.
Tyler only has so much energy, and I still got work to do.
Got to make all those trees.
5-minute warning. Ryan Petrie asks, will high-value targets stand out in RVR? targets such as guild leaders or top-ranking PvPers?
So there is a bounty system that will make specific targets more visible to you if you have that bounty.
Yeah, but it's nothing. There's nothing else. Like, they don't look different other than that.
Yeah, I don't know that, like, there's anything that just says if this person is a guild leader, they specifically get called out more. But you'll know who they are, right? Because if you play, because we're not on like a mega server or something, there are specific servers that will only have like some limited population. You'll get to know the people who are on your server, and you'll know who the important enemies are. And so I don't think that there's necessarily a need to necessarily call that stuff out. And if we did, I think people would circumvent it. Like, they would have an alt character that's their guild leader, and they wouldn't actually play that character. You know, so I don't necessarily think you would get a lot of value out of like a systemic function that notably called out people in that sort of a way. But there is a bounty system where you can mark someone so that they will get identified and marked to specific allies who are trying to collect on those bounties. Yeah, so there is a way to kind of do that, but it's not just implicit in the way the game functions.
All right. Should we go to the final question or do one more first?
I'm good with that, unless
we got to do it before Tyler falls asleep on the couch.
Yeah, I
got to stay awake.
All right. Lodoween asks.
It's just a fatigue thing.
Lodoween asks, how often does a new art concept turn into a change for a game design, and how does art go about expressing a new game design that hasn't been fully fleshed out?
I would say I don't think art dictates design too often. Usually the problem is if you don't have a good solid starting idea that's verbal or written, then you spend a lot of time just coming up with a lot of different things. You're casting such a wide net, at least in the concept phase, that you just don't know what you're making, so the artist has very little guidelines about what to make. I mean, we start off with like general size of something, what's its purpose, and then we can go into the concepting phase, or what realm is this supposed to go to. You need some guidelines, and then at that point a lot of it can be dictated of like, oh, this is a really good idea, could we also do this? Oh, I like this design, what if I could climb on it? Oh, I like this design, what if it shot lasers from its eyes? I mean, little things like that happen, but most of the time there's already like a good focus of what we're trying to get, and usually it's little things off the side. And I mean, I think that kind of answers both questions.
Yeah, usually I would say when we're getting concept art made for something, it's because something has already been designed. So if there's a design for a character or a weapon or something, we already know basically what it is, and we have a description or some reference images or something that say it's kind of like this, draw something that's kind of like this, but make it more flowery or whatever. Just the way that it's supposed to be stylized and what's supposed to be different than whatever references are being provided. And then sometimes we get back what we kind of thought we would get back, and sometimes we get back something that's totally different, and sometimes we end up going with the thing that's totally different because it's way cooler.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes where we're looking at the piece going, could we do that? What do we need to do that? Should we take that out? I don't have the tech for this or that or whatever, but let's just go ahead and throw it out there, and with the caveat of could we do this?
Yeah, but very rarely, I will say, sometimes, even though we don't just have artists drawing random things and then turning them into stuff, when we ask for concepts on something, we'll get something that doesn't fit what we were thinking or what we were asking for, like, at all, and we end up designing some way to get it into the game as something completely new that we hadn't designed. So, but that's super, super rare, but it's cool when it happens because it means that
we all got excited about something.
Yeah,
it
means that typically what happens is we're doing a concept art review or something, and the artist is like, well, here's 10 different versions of this thing or whatever, and we're all like looking at one of them and being like, that one doesn't make any sense, but that's really cool.
Yeah,
what can we do with it?
That does
so
happen.
We designed something to do with it just because it was something that was a really good idea.
Or, I mean, it can also be a really loose version of things like, oh, I don't really have the tech, it would take a lot of time to do this, or the art might take a lot of time to do this, could we maybe do this other thing? And, oh yeah, we can work with that. That's kind of a mutual type of example. Okay.
Ready to wrap up the wrap-up?
Yes. Sorry, it's not an issue of enthusiasm. It's fatigue on my end. And I got things to do.
Trees.
All
No,
right.
not trees.
Keep an eye out for our weekly update email going out this evening, and we'll see you later.
And check out the
Oh, is there a test this
no
weekend?
no test.
No test this weekend.
Like I was saying at the beginning, that's next week we'll be focused on the Dark Fool. So probably mid-ish week we'll probably be getting backers in to test that because we got to get through a build ourselves, and then with the goal of next weekend's test. And as I was saying, check out the cool armor concepts in the update.
Yeah, I gotta look at this too.
Yeah, and there's some, like I said, they won't all be in this week's. Thank you.
See you later.
See you later.